From Faithful Word Media, this is Healthcare Musings. I'm Dr. Hassaballa. Welcome, everybody, to Healthcare Musings. Happy to have you with me. So today we're talking about anemia in the ICU. Patients are typically very anemic, usually are anemic in the ICU. Many have chronic anemia. Many come in not anemic and then develop anemia, either because they're bleeding or we're giving them a lot of fluids and taking blood tests and blood samples. So a lot of patients become anemic or are anemic in the ICU. And so the question has been over the years, when do you transfuse blood? When do you give blood to patients who become anemic in the ICU? And again, shout out to the colleagues at pulmccm.org, Pulm, P-U-L-M, ccm.org, a great Substack. Everybody should subscribe. I'm a founding member, very proudly so. They had a recent post about, and they went through the guidelines that specialty societies have, critical care societies have, about transfusion triggers in patients, and it was very interesting. And overall, for the most part, in almost all conditions, they have a trigger of 7 to 8. So when the hemoglobin goes below 7 to 8, that's when you transfuse. And more specifically, in generally critically ill patients who are hemodynamically stable and not actively bleeding, most societies have recommended to transfuse when the hemoglobin is less than 7. This is the American Association of Blood Banks, which is now called the Association for the Advancement of Blood and Biotherapeutics, and the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine, again, recommend that you transfuse when the hemoglobin goes below 7. How about in active GI bleeding? Even, and this surprised me, even in active GI bleeding, the transfusion threshold should be less than 7. Maybe not someone who is pouring out and is hemodynamically unstable and in hemorrhagic shock. That's different. And actually, most of these guidelines excluded people who were hemodynamically stable and actively briskly bleeding. And so we have to take that with a grain of salt, with a caveat. But even active GI bleeding, hemoglobin, you transfuse when the hemoglobin goes below 7. Surgical patients, cardiac surgical patients, the AABB and the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine advise a hemoglobin threshold of 7.5 when it goes below 7.5. A U.S. Critical Care Society recommended a target of 7.5 to 8. And now, acute coronary syndrome is a little bit different. There isn't great evidence, but they do recommend that maybe a higher transfusion threshold. The European Society of Intensive Care Medicine recommended a target of 9 to 10. A U.S. Critical Care Society recommended against a restrictive strategy based on the trials that showed 10. So maybe someone with acute MI, acute coronary syndrome, we want to have their transfusion, their hemoglobin levels higher, and we want to transfuse when it's below 10. But even septic shock, not great evidence that you should keep hemoglobin levels higher, that again below 7. Now, caveats: someone who has a hemoglobinopathy, such as sickle cell disease, thalassemia, it's different. People who are hemodynamically unstable, someone who comes in with a multi-vehicular trauma, or they're actively bleeding. I had a patient once who was briskly bleeding from her stomach and it wouldn't stop. And I went through 9 tiers of our massive transfusion protocol, which is a tremendous amount of blood products. And that patient survived and did not develop renal failure. And for me, that's a huge success, right? So someone who's actively bleeding, you give them blood and you aggressively resuscitate them with blood. If they're actively bleeding. This is not what we're talking about, but just what we're saying is in general, hemodynamically stable, not actively bleeding patients, for the most part, we want to transfuse when their hemoglobins go below 7 or 8. Now, interestingly, the Substack talked about, well, why don't clinicians follow the guidelines? And so, he said, what if this patient has undiagnosed severe coronary disease? Or what if this stable GI bleed becomes massive overnight? but now the blood pressure is normal, but what if it goes down? Is this shock? What if the follow-up labs are not done in time? What if there's bleed elsewhere? So there's a lot of excuses or reasons that we clinicians come up with to not follow these guidelines. And it's just something, and I want to end with this, is something that's very important. A blood transfusion, again, it's life-saving in someone who's actively bleeding. No question, no doubt about it. My daughter who passed away, she had cancer. We got blood products all the time. And I want to shout out to all those generous people who donate their blood, and I encourage everyone to donate blood. Huge shout out to all those people who donate blood, take out their time, give their own blood to save others' lives. Thank you so much. You guys are healthcare heroes, just like everyone else. And we have to remember that a blood transfusion is actually a tissue transplant. It is taking someone else's tissue, this blood and blood products, and transplanting it to someone else. It is life-saving, no question. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't have possible side effects and complications. And so we shouldn't be willy-nilly about it. We should give it when it's indicated, because this really is a tissue transplantation. And so let's think about that. And it also gives honor to the donors, that we don't just waste blood unnecessarily, just give blood when it's not necessary and it's not indicated. Then it's taking this relatively rare resource, this tissue, away from someone else who needs it. So this is a great post from the pulmcccm.org colleagues, and just a good reminder of when we should transfuse, usually below 7 or 8, and to always remember that blood is a tissue transplant when we're giving blood transfusions, and we have to be careful and judicious when we do it. Thanks so much for your time and attention. And until next time, I'll see you all on Healthcare Musings. Take care. Thank you for watching. Sign up at healthcaremusings.com to get every episode delivered directly to your email. And please don't forget to leave a 5-star review. Thank you so much.